hope that you will be participants in many of our activities over the months and years to come. For those of you who are hearing about the India Initiative for the first time, we invite you to visit our new webpage, india.georgetown.edu. To find out more, you can see videos of past events and pretty soon forward links to Mr. Kurshid's remarks this evening to your friends who couldn't make it this evening. Let me make a couple of housekeeping announcements before we get started. You will notice a video camera in the corner, so this is on the record, and you should be aware of that. And your questions as such will therefore also be part of the permanent record that the digital world now creates. The second, if I could ask you to make sure that your cell phones are silenced, I would be very grateful. Our guest tonight is part of a new fellowship endowed by private donors in India to enable Georgetown to bring prominent Indians at the very highest level of their chosen professions to campus. Over the last week, Mr. Kurshid has been visiting our classes. In fact, this afternoon, he did a reading of a play that he has written for our theatre students. I imagine there are very few foreign ministers who have that in their portfolio as well. He has also spoken in the DC community, including events at the Council for Foreign Relations, at the US IBC, the US India Business Council, and of course this evening is here at Makara speaking to us. He is accompanied by Mr. Mohammad Ali Khan, who is an emerging India fellow as part of the same program. And earlier today, Mr. Khan had two events on campus detailing his legislative work, writing new laws to govern India's land acquisition policy, India's gender-friendly policies, and its National Green Tribunal. We're very honored to have had these guests as part of our community for the last week, and we hope that this is the start of a very long engagement with Mr. Kurshid and Mr. Khan. Mr. Kurshid, of course, doesn't require a very long introduction, but for the sake of protocol, allow me a minute to just run through a very impressive resume. He has committed a life of service to India, which follows in the tradition of his very esteemed family. His grandfather, Dr. Zakir Hussain, was the third president of India. His father, Mr. Kurshid Khan, was the first Muslim to be named foreign minister, a position that after many years in government service, including roles in commerce, minority affairs, and as Minister of Law and Justice, in 2012, Mr. Kurshid was named as India's foreign minister. After serving for 2 years, he has now returned to a very successful practice as one of India's leading advocates at the Supreme Court, and has a new book, in addition to that play I just mentioned, dissecting and thinking through the lessons to be learned from, let us call a spade, the thrashing received by the Congress Party in 2014. He remains very active in Congress politics and is actively and has been very frank in conversations held both in small and larger group settings over here about the challenges, but also the promise of a revitalized and re-energized Congress Party for Indian politics. We have invited him this evening to speak on all of those issues, really anything of his fancy under the rubric of the future of this country that he has been such an integral part of. And after he is done with his remarks, we will open it up to a Q&A from you. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Salman Khurshid.
Good afternoon. I'm very, very honored to be here this afternoon. For 4 days, extremely exciting and rewarding in more ways than one. Good to be back for such a long time at a university as distinguished as this one. And I'm very grateful to the initiative, to people, to my very good friend and Dr. Reddy, and many of you here for having given me this opportunity. I'm to speak today on India in the 21st century, and I was given the choice to make it off the record or on record, and I chose to make it on record because I do believe that India in the 21st century needs to be on record. It's important also for another reason, that we were we're under a very massive onslaught, media onslaught in our country, with a strict menu and a regime as to what public figures can say and what they cannot say and what they must not say. And for some reason they have, despite the fact that the digital world is very small, they have a very peculiar rule, which is obviously a rule that they've made, but it's applied to us, that there are certain things that you can say within our borders and certain things that you cannot say outside the borders. And my only response to that is to go back to the inspiration of Mahatma Gandhi and to say that wherever a rule or a law or legislation is fundamentally unfair or inequitable, you should defy it. But Mahatma Gandhi also said that defiance meant that you should be willing to face any sanctions that are imposed on you. So if any sanctions are imposed on me by the media in India, I will have to say that it's your inspiration that is responsible for. Well, 21st century, it's a century that was first talked about and first envisioned by our late leader, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi. He's the one who spoke of the computer. He's the one who spoke of software. He's the one who spoke of a modern urban life. He's the one who spoke of 5 days a week. He's the one who spoke about young people having the right to decide which way the nation goes. He's the one who spoke about modern technology being put to the service of eradication of the greatest curses that we continue to suffer, which is poverty, disease, disadvantage. And sadly, of course, we lost him at a very young age, and we lost him to conflicts that continue to plague India. We lost him, and we've lost many other very distinguished people in our country over the decades. But the conflicts haven't got resolved. And interestingly, when I went back from the UK, and before I got into public life, I thought I would write a book about what seemed to me some important issues which I felt empathetic on and I felt concerned about. And those issues were largely concerned about the minority situation in our country. And I call that book At Home in India, saying that despite the problems that we face and despite the questions that continue to be thrown at us, we as Indians feel comfortable and proud that this is our home. And that's why I call the book At Home in India. Many years later, after I've been in politics for a few years, at the time that we lost the 2014 election, I felt that I should write the book again. Maybe a new edition of that book, maybe a new version of that book. And when I sat down to work on that book, and I found that in the 25 years that that book had been around, nothing had changed. Nothing had changed in India. The very issues that I had talked about 25 years ago were the issues that were continuing to plague us, and with greater intensity than any time in the past. In the 2 years that have passed since we lost the election in 2014, those issues are now staring us in a macabre sort of picture. What are those issues? Those are issues about what is nationalism, what is patriotic conduct of any citizen, what is the right that we have to eat the kind of meals that we want to eat or speak the language that we want to speak, what should be the status and character of the universities that we have had a special relationship with, is like the Aligarh Muslim University, what is the the right of an Indian citizen belonging to a particular religion to claim equal space with everybody else in India and equality in India. What about the whole issue of reservations? Will it allow for reservations for those who coincidentally, despite having the same disadvantage as anybody else who has the benefit of reservations, like Dalits and backwards, who coincidentally happens to be a Muslim? But that's only relating to that book that I wrote, and therefore I wrote a 60-page introduction to that book and published it again, changing the tense somewhat because 25 years had gone by. But just when I finished that book, I realized that this is only a small part of the landscape. The issue of minority rights in our country is a very small part of the landscape. There is a much larger part of the landscape which relates to the idea of freedom, and a yet larger picture that relates to the idea of India. What has happened in 2014 is that an incredibly successful campaign was run by the opposition to the Congress, and we were virtually wiped out as far as the Lok Sabha was concerned, 44, falling from time that we had about 400 seats down to 44 seats. And we consoled ourselves by saying, well, BJP at some point in time had 2 seats. So 44 is still a lot better than 2. That's only a consolation. But 2 years since then have opened up enormous challenges to India, and I think how we deal with these challenges and the manner in which events pan out over the next 3 years will decide what kind of country we will live in the 21st century. We wanted to live in a country that was modern. We wanted to live in a country that was equitable, that was fair, that believed in affirmative action for those who had suffered. We wanted to live in a country where we had given the right to education to every citizen, child between the ages of 4 and 14, 6 and 14, where every family would have a right to food, constitutionally guaranteed right to food. 70% of Indian citizens, rural and urban together, would be given food to sustain and to nourish them. We had opened up the secret dockets of government under the right to information, so that any citizen anywhere on a piece of paper could demand information of any nature, and that information would be made available. We have given job guarantee in the rural areas under the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Development Program. We changed the terms completely as far as equity was concerned on the issue of land. The land acquisition reform, in which my friend Mohammed Ali, who is here, was very directly involved, was for the first time a recognition that the growth story of India would not leave behind those whose lands we were taking away at a throwaway price, but that they would have a share in that growth story in myriad of ways, including the compensation that they got for their land, and indeed the support that the government would provide as the growth projects took shape as to how they would be able to participate in each level of the growth story. And then, despite this remarkable array of far-reaching legislations and commitments, including in the field of health, in the field of housing, we were wiped out. We were wiped out because people thought that we were a weak and ineffective government. We were dubbed as being a corrupt government. We were dubbed as a government that didn't know, a drift that didn't know where it was going. Some of our sympathizers said that we were a fatigued government, that we had lost the will to live, that we had lost the will to win. And a lot of people felt that we lost the election because we were targeted as a government that was, for reasons of electoral advantage, interested only in the minorities of the country, whereas the huge majority felt it had been betrayed. And therefore, a person who could lead the majority towards a new dawn is what they found in Mr. Modi. I must say, in all fairness, that the campaign that Mr. Modi ran was not explicitly a communal campaign. He didn't need to. It was the undercurrent had been firmly established, and there was nothing for him to do except to say that I will change your life, I will give you a dream life, a good life that every American dreams of. And that's the kind of life you will get if I can win this election. We won this election. The problem is that he didn't explain to his party colleagues, including the people who made ministers, that this was to be a dramatic FDR moment, that this was a moment of economic change, reform, and a dramatic burst of energy, unshackling and unleashing the power of an average middle class Indian and bringing in everybody into that middle class dream. He forgot to tell his party this, and his party thought and believed that this was a mandate for a fundamental change in the Indian polity, which meant how we thought, how we lived, how we spoke, what kind of community relations we had, what kind of dreams we had, what kind of conversation we had, all had to change. That India had to become a different India. And the challenge was essentially to the idea of India that we had nurtured, and that we had inherited, and that we had hoped to protect and advance and to help grow over the years. And it's the idea of India which is under challenge. And what is the kind of India that he wants to make? We don't know. I have tried very hard to read very carefully his mind and his vision of India. I mean, you can see in bits and bobs what he said. He said there will be no corruption, which is something that we can't disagree with. He has said that everybody would get equal opportunity to grow and develop, that we can't disagree with. He's never said that you can only eat the meat that I tell you to eat. He's never said that. Therefore, we don't know where that policy is coming from. He's never said that I can't let universities decide their own curriculum. So we don't know where that's coming from. He's never said that I can't allow students to do what they please in a university. They can't talk about and speak about things that are not acceptable to me. He's never said that, so I don't know where the issue of sedition in the Jawaharlal University is coming from. He's never said that he would put boots on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. So I don't know where the idea of the US and India being natural allies, where that's coming from. He's never said that we prefer China over Japan or Japan over China. So we don't know where the statements made in China against Japan and the statements made in Japan against China are coming from. So we are not really clear. There is no equivalent of the State of the Nation address by Mr. Modi. But I'll tell you some interesting insights into what he says periodically. In his second speech from the Red Fort, he talked about communal violence and political violence. And the word he used in respect to the violence that everyone's worried about, and violence that has sort of shadowed him from his previous office in Gujarat to his office now as Prime Minister. The word he used was a moratorium. To me, and if there are any linguistic students of linguistic studies here, moratorium on violence is not something that I have ever heard used by any person who opposes violence. People say ceasefire. People say an end to violence. People say move on to peace. Let's forgive and forget. Reconciliation and engagement. Truth and reconciliation. But I've never heard the word moratorium being used for violence. What is even more interesting is that he merely asked for a 10-year moratorium. He didn't say, let there be a permanent moratorium on violence. Is that something that gives you a window into his mind? Is that the India or the ideal of India that our Prime Minister today has? Is a question, and I don't want to be judgmental, and I don't want to pass final judgment on him. Certainly not the final judgment in the United States of America, because this is something we must handle at home. But that's only a quick picture of what we are dealing with in terms of the platform from where we are to bounce further into the 21st century. Why is this happening? I have a thesis which many people are unwilling to accept today, but I hope that you will reflect upon it. Why are the results in election results giving us the kind of outcomes that we have seen in recent times? I believe two big mistakes were made at the time of India's partition and independence. Two mistakes that, in hindsight, going by the experience of President Mandela in South Africa, tell us how grievously wrong we were. One was that we accepted partition. And there are many people here who would know the background to why and in what circumstances we accepted partition. An option that was given to President Mandela in South Africa. Let's partition South Africa into black and white South Africa. And he rejected it outright and said, that will not be. We have fought to live together and we will live together. The question then followed from that was, if you have to live together, how will you ensure an electoral system that doesn't keep a de facto divide where there should be no divide and where there is no de jure divide? And that's when President Mandela decided to dump the British system of first past the post and pick the electoral system by which preferential voting list system is what gave South Africa an ability to have a white man and a black man, a white woman and a black woman elected in spite of what the local electorates were like. So you didn't have to look for the black constituency to be elected if you were black. You didn't have to secure yourself a white constituency in order to get yourself elected to parliament, because you had to be in a list, and it's the aggregation of the total opinion of the country that finally gave you the people who got into parliament. We rejected that. And as a result, what has happened is that today we have a severe premium on who you are and what your constituency is like. So you can't go to a constituency where people are not of your religion and people are not of your community and people are not of your caste and hope to get into parliament. There are exceptions, there are honorable exceptions, but the standard is not what we hoped that it would be, that these things would all become irrelevant. What has exacerbated this problem, having chosen this path with its problems, what has exacerbated this problem is the affirmative action law in our country. Reservations. Mr. Ali Sharif is here, he's worked a lot on reservations for Muslims. What are reservations? People who were untouchables in India were given special reservations in electoral office, i.e. in parliament and assemblies. 22% reservation is what they have in jobs, but 10% of reservation what they have is in elected offices. And today they have 22% reservations in jobs, state sector jobs, as well as 22% seats in all state sector universities. There is a major demand now from people, including people in my party, who are saying that these reservations should be extended to private sector jobs as well as private sector educational institutions as well, but not yet loud enough for it to be heard. Subsequent to the reservations that were given to the former untouchables, Harijans as Mahatma Gandhi had called them, there were people who said we are very similarly placed to the Harijans. We are disadvantaged as well. We also have lowly occupations and we must also be given protection. So they were given protection not in elected offices, but they were given protections in jobs and in educational institutions. And they are called the OBCs, the other backward classes. So the Harijans were the real backward classes, the other backward classes were the so-called OBCs. Unfortunately, there is no way of identifying a backward class in India other than through their belonging to a backward caste. So caste system that was abolished by the Constitution upon independence today has been once again revived as part of affirmative action. So if you look at people who have reservations as OBCs, which is other backward classes, each class is comprised only of backward castes. There is no non-backward caste person there because individuals are not given reservations. It's only the classes or communities that are given reservations. So they are 10% in parliament for Dalits, 22% in jobs and in educational institutions, 27% of OBCs in jobs and educational institutions. And that has created a special premium and a special gravitational pull for people getting into important political offices because of these special reservations that are available. Now the BJP is ambiguous about this. They want to use this advantage, but they want to do away with it because the BJP ideologues in the RSS, who are the people who control their minds, have traditionally been opposed to the idea of reservations. Reservations were brought about for equality, social equality, and therefore the intention of reservations was to make everybody part of one single, seamless society. Unfortunately, reservations have had the opposite impact, and they have recreated caste, but this time with a premium. And unlike the US, where at least some serious study is being done about how affirmative action has worked to bring people above poverty line, at least to some element in some section, and how the success stories of those who have made something of their lives because of affirmative action, reaching all the way up to the Supreme Court and to the White House, is something that is today not being seen as a possible outcome of reservations in India. There is now a constant demand for more people wanting to get into the reserved seats, more people and their communities asking to be included in the reserved category. No community is saying, thank you very much, we've done well, we've successfully, now majority of us have gone above the poverty lines and the disadvantaged line, if you like, and therefore we want to be excluded. More and more are getting in, nobody is getting excluded. So the average Indian who does not have the benefit of reservation is getting squeezed into a narrow space, and now is obviously going out to the private sector, but is worried that there is talk now about the private sector being subjected to the same reservation regimes that have worked or have been imposed in the public sector. And this is something that our colleagues and our collaborators elsewhere in the world, including the United States, will have to keep in mind as to which way we will shape our economy based on these fundamental decisions of our social sector. These are very important. There has to be clarity both of the opposition parties to which I belong and to the ruling party, so that you would be able to plan also what kind of relations you would have in India in the 21st century. And if we don't tell you the truth, then we would be betraying your trust and faith in what kind of India you are looking for. And when we talk about reservations, it's fine till we get to religions, which have been, just like caste was outlawed by the constitution, religious reservations were also prohibited by the constitution. So Christians and Muslims can't get reservations. And therefore, we came to the Sachar committee, which said that if a Christian and a Muslim is in the same position as a Hindu or a Buddhist in terms of occupation, why should the Christians and Muslims not get reservations? So, the Great Mandal Commission report brought out which community within the sub-community within Muslims and Christians were equally disadvantaged as the persons in the Hindu religion were, and therefore they should give reservations as well. But when these reservations are asked for, reaction immediately is that you're doing this for communal reasons. You're doing it because of religion, not because of backwardness. Supreme Court of India has to decide this issue over the next few weeks. So much as we get excited about reservation decisions and affirmative action decisions of the American Supreme Court, I think the Indian Supreme Court in the next 2 or 3 months will have to tackle this issue, whether reservations are to be limited specifically for people who belong to one religion, or whether they should cut across religions. And giving it to another religion doesn't mean it's being done on grounds of religion, but it's being done on grounds in the same backwardness as their counterparts suffer in any other, in the majority religion. So this is the big landscape of India in the 21st century. At the same time, it's an economy that's growing at 7%. We predict that it might go to 8%. It grew at up to 8% in our time, fell then to 5%. But it's an economy that will be sustained at least 7% over the next few years. But while it will be sustained at 7% in the next few years, we still continue to suffer the plague, as it were, of poverty and of people out of jobs. And the big challenge for India is jobs. What we need is millions of jobs every year. And that's what was the basic thrust of the campaign that made us lose the election and made Mr. Modi win the election. It's not just a matter of trade, it will have to be jobs. And there is no sign in the last 2 years that those jobs are coming. There are other signals and signs that are good, but there are no signs that jobs are coming. And even while this happens, India has a very strong Greens movement emerging, encouraged from the US, encouraged from Europe, where people are saying conservation versus development, the rights of animals and the rights of flora and fauna, environmental protection against development. We are a congested landscape. We are a large population, second largest in the world, and growing very fast. And that population means land. It needs land for houses, it needs land for farming. And therefore we are encroaching upon the forests, which are down to about 19%, for having been at least 30% once upon a time. We're down to 19%, and even in that 19, at least 3 to 4% is degraded forest. Our animal life is dying. Our water in the rivers is drying up. There is a problem with nuclear power plants, because there is a strong lobby against nuclear power plants. If we don't have water, there is no other way that we can get to supply power to the country without nuclear power plants. Nobody in any part of India is willing to let a nuclear power plant come in the neighborhood. And there, Long Island and Chernobyl obviously experiences are writ large in front of everyone. So, we are a country of paradox. This is the paradox of the 21st century. We could have overcome all our problems, and they are complex problems, not easy to resolve. We could have overcome all our problems if we, I believe, and many hopefully continue to believe in our country, if we had aspired to remain committed to the idea of India that was given to us by Gandhi and Nehru. But new icons are being created. The name of Nehru is being attempted to be wiped out from history. New history books are being written. New books on science are being written that take away the advantage that Western civilization has had in modern science, such as organ transplants and so on, saying that we were doing organ transplants long before we discovered what scissors are and what other medical equipment is. And we are being told to accept it. We are also being told that the ancient astronomy is what's going to solve our problems of modern day life. We are being told that mythical knowledge is what will solve tensions of modern day life. And we are being told that India has to accept a different culture. India has to accept a different dream. Now there are some of us who refuse to accept that. There are some of us who will continue to resist it and will continue to fight for freedom. I think today India is a country in which freedom is being put to a hard test. And the sad thing is that in that freedom, those who should have been the guardians of that freedom are joining in the effort to contain that freedom. And that is unfortunately part of the Indian media enterprise. But that's because Indian media is no longer the media of the past. Indian media is today an extension of business houses. So the business houses will decide what India is going to be, and the business houses will decide who will run India, is the big question. Now, what we were lucky in the socialist pattern of society that we introduced after independence was, I believe, our guarantee against widespread revolution in the country. There's still at least over 140 districts that are under a cloud of revolution and red and the people who are of extreme red persuasion, particularly some who are involved with tribals, who have taken up guns and are creating a serious issue for us, administration in those regions. But at least largely across the country, we've been able to contain any element of violent change and violent questioning of established authority. But our fear is that if that special feel that we had for the disadvantaged, the poor, the farmer, and the landless labor, if that is lost in the pursuit of a good life, India will be in deep trouble. So, much as we remain optimistic, determined to take India through to a successful outcome in the 21st century, there are some very, very serious challenges. I will be very happy to amplify through your questions. Thank you very much.
I'll let you call your own questions, but maybe I'll take one to my position over here, but calling you the first one, and ask you to put on your hat as former foreign minister, and maybe just offer some comments about the neighborhood, Pakistan, China, more generally, and what you see as your predictions or sort of your assessment of where we are in that regard.
A lot of people believe that if Mr. Modi hasn't in 2 years shown remarkable success in the domestic field, that he has done something incredible as far as foreign policy is concerned. I have very little reason to agree with that. I think that the vigor that he has shown and the stamina that he's shown in traveling extensively to the world, leading to people jokingly asking as to whether the Prime Minister will visit India sometime, is certainly commendable. I think as a new Prime Minister, as a new administration, reaching out to the world and getting to know the world is important. But I do believe that he hasn't dealt with the world with the seriousness that is required. He has assumed that the world will treat him the way Indian voters have treated him, that they will give him whatever he seeks and whatever he wants, and that he will have to give very little in return except some promises for the future. And that's what one has seen happen in the extensive travels that he's done, including the 3 times, and he's coming here soon, 3 times that he would have come to the United States of America. I think the disappointment that the Indian voter has with him, but is reluctant to express it so soon, is also the disappointment that a lot of his the leaders of the world that he has met are beginning to feel about him, but are not willing to express that categorically, because it's a little bit, makes them a little bit sheepish to give a sense that they were so credulous in believing that he offered a new dawn to them. Now, as far as the neighborhood is concerned, he, as you know, has a great deal of baggage of anti-Pakistan attitude, and he said on the eve of his election as Prime Minister that you can't talk and hold a gun at the same time, and he said this about Pakistan. That he's had, obviously, either a severe attack of myopia because he doesn't see the gun anymore, and he talks quite often, including having arrived in Pakistan on an unscheduled trip, unannounced trip for the Prime Minister's daughter's niece's wedding. A week later, we were attacked in Pathankot, one of our major air bases from Pakistan. But the saving grace of that for the Prime Minister was that his Home Minister said that Pakistan told us 6 terrorists were on the way. So this is if you like, this is a success that he's achieved with Pakistan, that now they don't attack us without telling us that they're attacking us. So they keep telling us that 6 terrorists or 4 terrorists are on their way, and we can never find all 4 of them. We find 2 or we find 3, and that one single terrorist that we don't find creates a lot of problem. There are signals, I must admit, there are some signals of Pakistan showing some signs of cooperating, particularly in confining people that we believe are major enemies of India, confining them to comfortable homes or what they call residential arrest or protective arrest. But I haven't seen any major advantage yet for India since Mr. Modi tried to make a breakthrough first by inviting the Pakistani Prime Minister for his oath ceremony, and then making an effort in Ufa and elsewhere to speak to him with an open heart. We've not been able to reconvene the foreign secretary level talks yet, although the foreign minister, my successor, did visit Pakistan, but for multilateral talks. I think we have a problem. I think we have the same problem that we have within the country, which is there's total lack of clarity. And I think America will discover very quickly that there's total lack of clarity. The expectations that the US has of Mr. Modi is not in a position to deliver, and I would have thought Mr. Modi would be better off telling US what his constraints were. Similarly, I hope and wish that US will tell Mr. Modi what their economic constraints are, and that things that Mr. Modi has been telling the country that he's going to get from the US is not something the US can give in a hurry. So I don't see a very hopeful landscape as far as foreign policy is concerned, but he considers it important, and I suspect that he hopes to follow President Obama in getting a Nobel Prize in the near future. And he'll continue to work towards it. I can't complain if he gets a Nobel Prize, provided he does something that's worth the Nobel Prize. Yeah, getting it. So we can just start from here when we come down. Please, yeah.
What are your views on the entire sedition charges and the anti-national sentiment, so-called anti-national sentiments that were displayed at Jawaharlal Nehru?
You're putting me in serious danger of being hauled up for sedition if I were to answer that question. But I think that all sensible people, and that's not just people who support the Congress, people who are supportive of other political parties, including many people who for good reason and for honest reason supported the BJP in 2014, believe that this not only is the sedition law absurd in our country, but it's being applied to the young man from Jawaharlal Nehru is completely completely and totally unacceptable. There is a very serious worry. There is a very serious worry about not just the sedition law, but similar laws that are applied and will be applied to people to crush dissent and to crush disagreement. And I would imagine that it's important that those who applauded Mr. Modi should, and who Mr. Modi may feel that he has a special relationship with, will be candid in telling him that this is not acceptable. Yeah.
Thank you for speaking today. I have to phrase this question apolitically, in the sense that I'm not looking at it through the lens of the next election coming up, but a couple of years. But you kind of mentioned some of India's institutional or electoral challenges, such as the first past the post system, etc. Do you have in mind specific reforms that you think that the democratic system can pass that will actually fix India? You know, for instance, change the actual electoral system, or some people mentioned that federalism might be very helpful, yet at the same time the state's trying to strengthen its power over the dissidents and revolutionaries, as you said. So do you have in mind any sort of reforms that...
Well, I need to be fair there that last time the BJP were in power, they had set up a constitutional reform commission headed by an outstanding former Supreme Court judge, Justice Venkachilaya, and they had sort of seriously considered a presidential form of government. But my party was completely opposed to it and rejected it outright. I personally think that there are some things that can be said for a presidential form of government in India. This winner takes all is perhaps not a good thing for a complicated social society as India is. But that's how we are. There is no serious impetus for constitutional reform. We are sort of taking little bites in the cherry on sort of small little things. Right now there is a major concern about reform of the Supreme Court, which is nothing like your Supreme Court. We have 30 judges who don't sit together. You have 9 judges who sit together. In our Supreme Court, judges sit in benches of 2s and 3s, and sometimes for constitutional matters they sit in a bench of 5. The largest bench that has ever sat in the Supreme Court is 11. 13 sat to overcome the impact of the 11, but disbanded themselves after 2 days. So it's a more pressing concern is reform of the Supreme Court and the appointment of judges. We are the only country in the world where the judges appoint judges themselves. The executive has virtually no role in it. We thought that needed reform, but when the BJP was trying to do the same thing, we felt it's best to leave it alone for a while, because this is a bad time for government to be appointing judges. But that's where we are. I think the reform of the Supreme Court, which also means, obviously, through some changes in the Constitution, seems a higher priority in the public domain today than reform of the legislature and reform of the electoral system. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask that you said about uplifting the minorities, right? I mean, the minority is a big issue in India. So, what do you think any constitutional amendments can be made that can help them get a better standing in society today?
Well, there are adequate provisions in the Constitution that protect minorities. Just as free speech is protected in the Constitution, just as free movement is protected under the Constitution, freedom to organize is protected under the Constitution. So are minority rights, right to worship, for instance, right to institutions of religion, right to educational institutions set up by minorities, are all entrenched fundamental rights in the Constitution. The problem is in implementing them. In some cases, you require follow-up legislation, which is what we've done in right to food, right to education, right to information. The broad principle is there in the Constitution, but its practical applications have to be worked out periodically, either by the judges through pronouncements in their judgments. In Article 21, right to dignity, they've expanded to right to education, right to free air, right to be free of pollution. And, as you might be surprised to hear, in one case the Supreme Court said there's a right to free sleep. that the state can't disturb you when you're asleep. This happened in the case of the protest movement in Delhi. But the court has expanded it widely. So it can either be done by case-by-case basis by courts, or it can be done by legislation. Today the worry is not that you need fresh legislation. If two herdsmen are lynched and hanged by the nearest tree because they were herding some cattle, and they were not even cows, they were buffaloes, if they can be hanged, it's not because the Constitution allows people to hang innocent herdsmen, but because it's the implementation that's faulty. So there isn't any need for fresh legislation or constitutional amendments. I think what requires is a public endeavor and a public commitment that government or any government for that matter would not be allowed to this kind of dereliction in terms of the commitments that it has to its citizens.
Hi sir, thank you so much for your time. I'm a first year student of the Master of Science in Foreign Service program here. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on how the Congress can revive itself, because we talk about reform in India, but what do you think the Congress should do to reform itself, internal reform, because we see that it was hit badly not just in the 2014 general elections, but also some of the state elections after, like in Delhi in 2015. So just your thoughts on that.
See, the Congress, like any party that has been in power for a long time, and then goes out of power, needs to review and revise and restructure itself. And that's happening within the Congress four walls. That is happening, and in some cases faster, in some cases not so fast. But I think the big problem for the Congress is not internal structures, which are important, not its outreach as far as grassroots are concerned, but to understand the social reality of India. Now, trouble in India today is that in a state like Haryana, people say that they want reservations if they belong to a community of Jats, who are the most well-off community, and they demand reservations after the Supreme Court has rejected reservations for Jats in the previous judgment. We had a very successful Jat leader in Haryana who lost the election, of course, last time. And how do we go and tell him that you must tell your community they can't have reservations? So it's not what Congress can do, but the difficulty of handling an extremely complex and fragile social environment in the country. How do we educate the people of the country and stop being pushed into a corner where taking populist positions has become the name of the game in politics? We are accused of taking populist positions at times, whereas the people who defeated us did nothing but take populist positions. So this is a challenge for India. It's a challenge for young people like you as to how you can steer India towards a future in which outright populism will not be the basis of change in government. Delhi, we lost on sheer populism, a populism of the kind that has not been heard ever anywhere in the world. Free electricity, free power, free water, free travel, free Wi-Fi. Free Wi-Fi was the Delhi program. In fact, there was a joke about Wi-Fi that one guy standing and asking another guy, this Wi-Fi is going to be free, and what will I do with the Wi-Fi I have at home? Now, this is the kind of atmosphere in which we lost that election. Now, it's sad that you should lose an election to that kind of populism if you don't, for some reason, have credibility that can say this populism cannot work, that we have to pay for what we want, and that you may want to add greater efficiency and greater transparency, which is what we try to do by improving processes of governance. But you can't just say, I will give you everything free, and then 5 years later come up with some other excuse. So these are very big challenges, and these are challenges not just for the Congress. These are challenges for our whole country.
Mr. Kurshid, thanks for your remarks. Just a question using the Aadhaar Biometric Identity Initiative kind of as a framing device for a number of the themes that you've touched on. So, delivery of social benefits, the salutary effects of technology, national security, privacy. Do you sort of have some thoughts that you can share with us on how India is balancing issues at the intersection of privacy and civil liberties, national security and technology?
Well, these are all very, very important issues. I mean, privacy is a very important issue, and I would not for a moment sound, it's not a concern that we've actually registered this concern with the government. But we often told that you're the one who started the Aadhaar card, so why are you now getting so worked up? Now, it doesn't matter. We started the Aadhaar card with the fact that there will be discovery of possible issues and problems that we must address, and therefore we cannot be stopped from saying that something further needs to be done. But the problem in India, when you talk of privacy, the problem in India is that we are tackling millions of people who do not have toilets to go to, right? And there is somebody else sitting in a Delhi five-star hotel saying, you are impinging upon my rights of privacy. And the Supreme Court, of course, has given the right of privacy, and therefore we will have to observe the right of privacy. But what sense does it make to a person who doesn't have a toilet? And where do we, as administrators or leaders in the country or political participants, where do we ensure that balance will be maintained, that in protecting privacy in the Aadhaar card, we don't forget that we have something to do for that poor man who doesn't have a toilet, and a woman who doesn't have a toilet. We have amazing programs in the country to address these issues, but when we go to the ground, we find that trickle-down effect hasn't happened, that the money has been siphoned. And this is something that has to be done by the state governments. It can't be done by the center. We can provide funds, we can provide the idea, we can provide the scheme, but at the end of the day, the state governments have to do it. And the good thing about the rural guarantee scheme was that you could see it happen from village to village. But obviously, a lot of that money was siphoned off because the individual village chief would give it to his favorites, not to a person who deserved it more. And that's the reason why Mr. Modi's first reaction was that this was a living example of India, of Congress party's incompetence and stupidity. But he's now released 30,000 crores for this, perhaps realizing in 2 years that it wasn't as stupid as he thought it was. Yeah.
Thank you for speaking to us today. Given the uptick in nationalist sentiment that's often promoted by the RSS and the BJP, do you think that the BJP will have to pay a political price at the polls come the next national elections? Or do you think there's sufficient support among the general electorate of India to insulate the BJP from the negative effects of public opinion?
Well, it's still three years down the road. The truth is that the BJP is losing its popularity incrementally and very fast. But the other side of the truth is that Mr. Modi has not lost his popularity equally as his party has. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. He is a little bit of a magician, we have to admit, and he may have some tricks in his bag that he will want to produce before the next elections. But it would be sad if we are propelled back to power simply because of his non-performance. I think it's important for us at this point in time to provide an alternative vision of the India of tomorrow that will not rely unduly on his failures and his lack of success. He must now remain the focus of the next election. The focus of the next election must be ideas that young people can relate to, and ideas that larger sections of Indian society can relate to. And we should be able to, and we should really win an election if we are going to win that election on the basis of an alternative picture of the India that we want to build. Much of that will of course be derived from what we did in UPA 1 and UPA 2, but we have to ensure that the flaws and faults and the pitfalls of what we tried to do in UPA 1 and UPA 2 are weeded out, and then a modified and improved version of that is placed before the people. So,
Sir, the voting proportions, percentages suggest that the BJP got somewhere around 30% of the total electorate. So I'm not sure if BJP is popular enough. It is the way the electorate was dissected through different party systems, because we have multiple party systems as opposed to, for example, in the US States, we have parties, major parties fighting the case. But I have a question relating to Aadhaar kind of policies which India is starting. I've been working in development and welfare and power elevation issues for almost 2.5 decades. What we find is the government, both at the center and also the state resources, the budgetary allocations, substantial amount of money is spent on these welfare programs like NREGA, the PDS system, subsidized food, and there are many other subsidized programs getting supposedly to be accessible to all people equally. But as you suggested, the policies are good, but when the implementation occurs, the implementation is problems. So how do you think, as the longest ruling political party, you think you pursue, how are you going to improve the delivery mechanism where all people equally access it? For example, Anganwadi Center is a major program, 25-year-old program, where nutrition is provided to young children, less than 3. Every 500 population is supposed to be having one center. Now, if you go through the data, we see that all these Anganwadi centers are already in place. That's what the government strategy suggests. When we do an independent survey, we don't see it, as you suggested, there is something happening. But what we found is the places where they don't exist are exclusive pockets, such as the minority areas, such as a particular state. So the kind of public sector or the so-called government level, if I use the word discrimination, occurs exclusively towards certain communities in India. How do you overcome that? The courts do not address this issue. The government doesn't have a mechanism to address this issue. The political system doesn't address this issue. So where should these people go to get their due share of the public is a kind of equal opportunity institution, which even the United States and France and UK, they have a kind of parallel institutional arrangement where people of this nature can go and seek justice.
Well, I must first disclose to the audience here that you're the best person to answer that question. You've converted your answer into a question. But this is a serious problem because of the size of India and the federal structure of India. This is a serious problem. And as you would recall, under the recommendations made by your committee for minorities, what we had said, we had selected 90 districts which had more than 25% percentage of minority population, and we had targeted many of these schemes in those regions, in those districts, and even in those districts we were looking at those particular pockets which were high on the minority. And this, unfortunately, has been treated as appeasement. This was a program of fairness and justice. This is a program that any citizen is entitled to. but it was based on scientific data which said that amongst all the citizens that are entitled to this, the least advantaged are the following, or the greatest disadvantaged are the following, and therefore there has to be a targeted delivery. It would take 10 years, and in those 10 years, hopefully we could have studied whether the program requires modification, requires more funding, etc. But it's a great disappointment that before we could actually see the results of these begin to show, these programs have been put on the back burner, and that the present government is not willing to put in the kind of finances that are called for. But there was at one stage a serious discussion in government that some of these schemes should be brought under the central government. The trouble is the central government can't have a huge bureaucracy that can, in the vast expanse of a subcontinent, go to every village and every nook and corner and decide that the implementation is being done effectively. As we prepare for a future government, I think these are issues that we'll have to address, and perhaps we'll have to fall back on people like you for advice. Should we go there?
Thank you for being here and giving us good insights, and I thank the university for inviting you here. I'm Vatsal Bhai. And many of the students from this University of Indian origin might be interested in working in Indian Administrative Services or so. So my question is, you may have seen Indian Administrative Services quite closely. So it's a simpler question. In our progress, India's progress, for future, how do you see Indian Administrative Services play a role? Are they hindrance or are they engines for growth?
Well, frankly, I have a very high opinion of the Indian Foreign Service and the Indian Administrative Services, and then the allied services that come along with them. I can't imagine that India could have been run if these services or permanent services were not there. But there is need to reform these services as well. From time to time, we've looked at what can be done. The Foreign Service, for instance, the size of Foreign Service and domain knowledge in many areas in which the Foreign Service hasn't in the past been able to effectively, particularly when we're talking about multilateral deals, etc., whether it's WTO or it's space law or it's maritime law, there are limits to which the Foreign Service can go. And there it's been agreed that we will bring in people from other ministries who have domain knowledge and come as full-time Foreign Service officers, and then perhaps go back if they want to 5 years or so later. The idea of bringing in lateral entry both into the Foreign Service as well as into the Administrative Service, I think, is very important. Some of our young administrators, district magistrates, particularly some of the women who have come into the IAS, are doing incredible work. Some of them have left the IAS and come to private sector or come to institutions and universities where they're doing very good work. But I think that what we need to do is to ensure that there is a sense of reward and a sense of being recognized for doing good work and not being subjected to harassment that our law can often do, harass politicians and bureaucrats for mistakes that they might make. I am a great votary for the proposition that every mistake is not corruption and every mistake is not a crime. Here in the investment sector, for instance, sometimes somebody who's failed in one investment is treated as a more promising candidate for a fresh investment. That's something of an attitudinal change that we need in our country. The biggest fear of enterprise and the biggest fear of anybody who wants to do innovation in India is the CBI. And it comes after you, several years after you finish the job that you were doing, at a time when you don't even have any papers to be able to show to them that what you did was in fact honest and justified. We had tried to handle some of these things in the 11 or 12 Administrative Reform Commission reports that were headed by Mr. Moily, but events in government never really allowed us the time to look at them more carefully and pick out those parts of it that I believe have an urgent urgent dimension that needs to be addressed. So,
We're coming to the end of the Obama administration, and I wonder if you might give us your thoughts on assessing the strengths and weaknesses of U.S. policy towards India, and whether you would venture to give any advice to the next occupant of that office, whoever he or she.
well, I shouldn't interfere in the free choice of American Democrats. And by Democrats, I mean those who are involved in democracy rather than the political party. I shouldn't influence your choice or push you into any particular corner. I would think that India would be very, very worried if Mr. Donald Trump was to be your president. But speaking of Mr. Obama, let me tell you honestly that when Mr. Obama won his election for the first time, somehow many Indians felt, although they hadn't voted for him back home in India, that they felt that the person they were voting for had won the election. And they celebrated it as much as you celebrated it here with the songs and dances. But I think of the past, the most successful, most popular American president in India was President Kennedy. I may not be wrong in saying that President Obama remains a second close runner to President Kennedy. Although the difficult world in which President Obama has worked, and the fact that he was dealing and preoccupied with an economic crisis at home, I think did not allow him that much leeway in reaching out to India. So there may have been some disappointments from that point of view. But I think that he would go into history being thought of as a good friend of India, and as someone that India felt comfortable about and really wanted to see him even more successful. Good thing is that India trusted President Obama, and his words have meant a lot over the years. So I hope that whoever comes to the White House will follow his path closely.
That seems as good a note as any on which to end. We couldn't have done this today without the work of the student volunteers from the Georgetown-India Dialogue, host here at the Montara Center, the staff of the Asian Studies Program. Thank you very much for being here. It's been an honor. And please join me in thanking the students.
Very good to see you.